Well, welcome everybody again to the Inside Outers live stream. Today is episode 6, and today we're going to be looking at family dynamics with the theme from roles to relationships. So if you're not watching this live, I will leave a link in the description where you can fast forward to the content, just to save watching the beginning part of the live stream where we're waiting for people to come in and sort of finding our way into the session. So feel free to do that. Welcome to those that are coming in at the moment. And let me just go to the chat. Audio and video is working. Thanks, Kate. So maybe if you're coming in to stick around for the live stream, let me just remove that video so I don't have to see that in the background. Let us know where you're watching from, and feel free to put out any questions that you have around this theme of family dynamics. Today I'll go briefly over the last episode because it will feed into today's live stream as well. Excuse me. So just to let everybody know that I am a qualified counselor. I've been counseling for, this is my 10th year as a professional counselor. I did about 7 years of 7 or 8 years of face-to-face counseling before moving to online counseling to become available to the rest of the world as opposed to just one local area. So I do now provide one-on-one counseling. Well, I provide face-to-face counseling and also Skype online counseling, just to let people know about that. Okay, so also if you've been watching the videos, enjoying the videos, feel free to become a patron on the Patreon page. I try to put out my videos early there so people can view them before they go to YouTube. It's nothing, you don't have to do that, of course. It's just a little opportunity to support the videos that I make and all of that. And that's an option there for you, but there's certainly no obligation to do that at all. Okay, so in the last live stream, we talked about relationship dynamics, and I looked at it from the position of true unity, false unity, and true unity. And so just recapping on that, because those relationship dynamics ultimately feed into family dynamics when children are involved. Excuse me. So with false unity, let me start with disunity. There is two people are essentially not in agreement with one another, either holistically or in certain areas of their relationship. There's conflict, there's tension, there's one fighting for one thing, the other fighting for something else, and they're both sort of on separate paths trying to have relationship with each other, which leads to problems, leads to conflict and the issues that come with that. With false unity, you've got you've essentially got unity, but it's in a dysfunctional way, in a way that promotes codependency, enabling, and those sorts of things. So it could be someone. I think I used the example last time if someone is alcoholic and they're drinking all the time, and there's all the consequences that come with that. And then you've got the other person who wants to be a rescuer, who doesn't want to often doesn't want to face their own issues, and so focuses their attention on the one that's doing the drinking and takes care of them and props them up in a way that enables the drinking and also helps to avoid their own issue. So in that, would call that false unity. And then we have true unity, where there is both autonomy, there's interdependence, there's cooperation, and there's both individuals are working for the greater good of the couple, which leads to like a healthy relationship, a healthy intimacy window, which I'll talk about more today. And as a result of that, that also feeds down in a healthy manner to the children. So hopefully that all makes good sense. So just hello to people that are arriving to the live stream. So let's look at family dynamics, and we'll take it from there. So let me just move this around a little bit. Okay. Hopefully you guys can see that. Okay. Let me move that forward. That's good. So we're going to look at the family from this perspective. So we've got, just one moment. Just had a coffee delivered from my wife. I'll call that true unity. So looking at the family dynamic, we've got essentially the man and the woman, the husband and the wife. What I'm doing here is what they call a genogram, which is essentially like a counselor's form of a family tree. And squares represent the males, circles represent the females. Actually, that's going to get in the way. Let me do that again. So, okay. So let me just put that in there for now. So can everyone see that properly? Yeah. So depending on the state of the relationship up here, to the level that this is healthy, essentially, is to the level that things are healthy underneath this system for the children that are involved. So let's say there's, I don't know, boy, girl, boy, or something like that. And in this space here, a way of looking at that there is like the relationship space, the intimacy space between the couple. And to the level, like another way of saying this is the space that like the space between two people is essentially like the relationship space. So what we put in here, we reap, and what we, whether it's positive or negative, what we put into the space, we take from the space. So when we true unity, false unity, and disunity, all have ripple effects down to the children. And I like to look at it like it's what does or doesn't happen up here has an effect below. And another way of looking at it is it has both, you could say, sort of tangible consequences and intangible ones. It's like visible ripples and invisible ripples sort of get fed down in here. So when things are functioning well, and I'll go into it a bit more later, you've got unity up in here, you've got cooperation up here, and a lot of positive energy, essentially, a lot of good energy that's going into the relationship, because when things are going poorly in a relationship, it costs a huge amount of energy to live in disunity or even false unity. So when you've got a lot of cooperation, you've got, I guess, a surplus of energy, you could say, that then moves the attention from the couple to each other to the children, to look after the children. When there's not that unity, when a lot of energy is going into this space between the couple, to a certain extent, there's less energy or positive energy available to focusing in on the children. So when there's problems, we'd look at it as there's a what do we call that? Sorry, an intimacy vacuum. So when you've got false unity and disunity, there are essentially problems going on between the couple that draw the children up into the space to bring balance. So imagine this is like one of those mobiles that you can have for children where, you know, the string coming down and there's probably a proper name for these things, but it has the metal going across and mobiles hanging off it. You know, imagine this here is one of those. And when you hold it and you just push one part of the system, everything moves. Everything just works with the movement of the other. And it's all to create balance and stability. And so when things aren't going well, there's the system is still trying to find balance in the system with what is in the system. Whether it's positive, negative, healthy, unhealthy, the system naturally tries to move and bend itself to support the structure, keep its integrity. So another way of looking at this is looking further back. So at one point, parents were children too, and they had parents and so on. And there can be like a passing down of things. So let's say the male, the husband, has had a father who was violent. That would have had a deep impact on him, and he could go one of a few ways. He could become violent himself, or he could become very passive as a reaction to the violence of his father, and it could have other sorts of avoiding conflict, because a conflict meant violence in his childhood. And so it can either become very passive and withdrawn and not engaging, and then maybe become violent when pushed due to not facing what's going on. These are just there's so many examples that we could apply here, but these are just some general ways of looking at it. So if you've got that going on for him, then what might be happening over here? So she might have come from a very passive family. Father was very passive. And so a part of her was attracted to that passivity, that gentleness, that quietness, that he exudes. And so that brings her to the space, if you like. But then because his quietness is a reaction to his childhood, there's some liabilities to his approach, and that can cause problems. So on one hand, she's attracted to the quietness or the gentleness, but then at the same time, when he needs to step up or he needs to engage, when there is a problem and he's not engaging with it, then that can cause problems in the space. You could say it causes some kind of intimacy vacuum. There's something wrong here. So his quietness could cause her to become confrontational. Like, where are you? Come to the relationship. Let's talk. Which could be very frightening for him, because he's trying to avoid conflict, because conflict is violence. And so he's trying to preserve the relationship by withdrawing. And she's trying to preserve the relationship by pursuing him. And that could become a dynamic that goes on for years and years, where she might pursue him to try and get him to engage, which would cause him to maybe even get angry to protect himself because the withdrawal stops working, which hurts her. So she backs off and things settle down for a bit. But then life goes on, problems persist and so on. And so this creates some problems. And that all has, whatever the dynamic is here, let's say, can then cause the children to get caught up somehow in this. So ways that could happen, let me just draw. So it could cause one child to sort of find themselves inside the intimacy vacuum in some way to try to bring the balance. So what he could do is try to be like a mediator. Like he might be able to see the problem that they can't see. So like, why is dad not talking? Mum's coming to talk to him. Why is he withdrawing? And he kind of knows that when this dynamic goes on, eventually there is a blow up, there is a conflict. So so he can come in to try and be a peacemaker, try to bring the couple together, and it often doesn't work, or it never works in a healthy sense. But it's an attempt for this child to bring balance to the system, because balance to the system brings some security back to him. But it causes him to move away from who he really is, like just being a child and growing and developing. Part of what's happening for him is he's moving away from himself to try to fix this, which he really has no power over. Another way that it could happen is children can sometimes take sides. So so this child here could come up and kind of be the confidant for the mum. So mum's feeling the intimacy vacuum. She's hurt, she's withdrawn, she's feeling unloved, and this son picks that up and feels that and goes to comfort the mother, bringing its own kind of complication. So there could be, in this child, there could become like an over attachment to the mum, and a kind of either a distancing or conflict with the father, bringing in some Freud type stuff. But he could sort of be angry at the father for what he's doing, seeing his quietness and anger as a problem. Because in a sense, what's happening for him is he has an anger problem. Even though he's reacted to his father's anger by trying to be passive, he's probably got some unresolved anger to deal with. And he tries to deal with it through either withdrawing, or when that doesn't work, and if you've seen the other videos, we talk about certain parts, he's probably got a protector that does anger, let's say, and also an exile that does anger. So for him, the exile anger is the withdrawal part. He's trying to avoid being angry, or trying to just not have anger around him. And so anger is a dangerous thing. We don't want to feel it. We don't want to be around it. But when this space gets too intense, it could cause him to act out in an angry way to protect himself, because he's afraid of what's going on. And the anger is really a fear reaction. And that's the protector in him. And so, but back to this child can grow to be hostile or upset with his father and overly connected to his mum, in a sense creating an imbalance, but at the same time trying to bring balance to the system. So again, the daughter, she might do the opposite. She might see that, her mother's attempt to try to draw him out is what causes him to get angry, and so feels annoyed at the mother for feeling like she's creating the anger problem, and so sides with the father, and that can create like an intimacy, if you like, like sharing, like being a confidant, essentially being like a surrogate partner to a parent and could find herself feeling distant from the mother. And if we're looking at this, it's almost like creates a bit of a, this is just a made up example, but it's like, well, she's trying to bring comfort to him and is upset with the mother. He's trying to bring comfort to the mother and is upset with the father, and he's trying to be a reconciler of the dynamic between them. And so when we look at the siblings, it could cause some conflict between brother and sister, because like he's like, oh, mum's right, and she's like, no, dad's right, and so there's can be a conflict here. And if you can sort of basically see it, that it's all creating roles within the system to try to balance and protect the system, yet no one's really being themselves. We'll say that like their true self. This person's playing a role of trying to not bring anger into the family, which is actually bringing a lot of anger to the family. This person, at least in this scenario, is just trying to bring balance herself to the system by like, you're not talking to me, come into this space so we can resolve some things. This child's being a rescuer to the mother. This child's being a rescuer to the father, and this child is trying to be a rescuer to the system. And the thing to keep in mind, that, well, essentially what I've said, it brings disconnect to the self. The system, the family system, become roles to keep the system going, which is all understandable, but it's moving everyone away from themselves, essentially, from who they really are. And ultimately what then happens is these roles get carried into their adulthood. So let's look at, let me use a different color. So this person grows up and goes off. Let's say they all get married. And none of this has been resolved from the family of origin. So this person has developed a lot of sensitivity to the system, because they could see kind of the problem going on between the two of them and sought to bring balance. So they can grow in a lot of awareness and sensitivity to dynamics and so on, but it's a survival mechanism rather. Well, it's both a gifting, you could say, or an ability, but some of that ability is a defense mechanism to try to, in this case, to try to protect the system. And so in some respects, without the awareness that it's a defense mechanism and not, awareness that they might be aware of their ability to notice things, but not see that part of it is actually a defense mechanism. It's become a protector in a way. And so that could have that could play itself out in specific kinds of ways with their relationship and with their children. So if we look at it from this perspective, you've got this person here who reacted to their father's anger by denying their own anger, trying not to be angry and avoid anger, which brings that whole issue into this system here. They become aware of what he's doing, what she's doing, and tries to fix that. And so they could develop a certain type of relationship with anger themselves. They could see it as destructive, and they might become highly sensitive to any problem whatsoever and be onto it really quickly, which could be both good and potentially problematic. So on one level, they're aware of when problems arise in the relationship, or if they've got children in the family, but might have a lack of sensitivity to how they address it because it's become a defense mechanism, a protector. And so instead, they might go just too hard into solving problems, too confrontational, too direct, or something like that, that actually causes people to be a bit offside and resistant to their attempts to solve the problems in the family because of where it's coming from within them. But he's not aware of it, and then probably they're not also aware of it to some extent. So it kind of plays itself out through the generations. For this person here, so they've grown let's say an overly or an unhealthy attachment to the father, and kind of become like a surrogate, either mother or wife to the father. Could also lead to some difficulties. There could be a whole range of different things, but one of it could be when they got married. So let's say they get married, there could be some kind of dynamic that goes on between daughter and father that he feels as though he's not the husband. He feels like it's somehow undermining the relationship in some respects. Perhaps whenever there's problems, instead of her talking with him about it, she might go to the father and talk to him about it, creating some triangulation, because then he might become hostile towards the son-in-law. He could become resentful with his wife and for feeling like she's dishonoring him by going to the father in the first place. And you've kind of got this round and around thing. And the same could apply here for this person over here. I think one thing I guess some of where I want to take it today is around I guess developing some awareness of what to do about it and so on, because we've all been children to parents at some stage, and some of us might be parents to children, so we can be looking at it from two different angles at the same time. But essentially what happens when there's disunity and false unity is that there is something unacknowledged in here within the relational space that broken down is he's not owning something or aware of something that's going on for him, and neither is she. It's like unconscious, it's in shadow, let's say, like his anger is in shadow, and so on. So what can happen, like what you can sort of see happening here, is you could almost flip this chart upside down, in a sense that now, these children are becoming like parents to their parents' shadow. So there's a role reversal, if you like. There's the children to develop or keep that structure going, cease in a sense being children and being spoken into in certain ways, like being built up, being raised to be adults, and then are instead part of them. And it could be a little bit in some cases, or it could be almost a full-time job, become parents to their parents. And instead of the flow of love, the flow of attention, the flow of building up going this way, it kind of gets reversed and it's going this way. So now the children have become the resources, essentially, to try to keep this going up here, instead of this up here being this couple up here being a resource to the children and what they need. So the needs of the child get lost to some extent, and then the needs of the parents become more important. Now that can take on a whole lot of different things. let's say this person over here develops a depression, depression because of this whole system, but doesn't know it, is not owning it, is kind of lost in it, then, like, to the level that we're not connected to a part of ourselves that ends up controlling us, but it also can control the children. So whenever one of these children sees mum depressed and sad, this person here particularly could find themselves coming up here trying to take care of the mother's sadness, taking care of the mother's depression. In a way, it might kind of work, like in a sense that it like might make her feel better, but it's coming from him in a way that's going to end up harming him in some way. And it could end up that he ends up carrying a depression because of all of the energy that's been spent taking care of his mother's depression and sadness, and having his needs not met could lead him to also developing a depression or just a chronic sadness, because his heart essentially was missed in childhood to some extent. His needs weren't met, and a lot of his energy that should have been going into just developing himself and moving into adulthood went to taking care of his mother's depression to bring balance to the system. Where else could we go? What I want to do is, like, essentially, like, draw a line through here. It's like a boundary to signify that there's certain things that need to stay up here and there's certain things that need to stay down here. Essentially, you could say, like, if we had an eraser, removing these lines, removing these lines, these dynamics. And when we're adults and we look back on our childhood, and some of us have had great childhoods and it's been going really well. It's gone really well. Some of us can have very difficult childhoods and have some of this going on to some extent. Is when we're adults and we come to see, hang on, I've got relationship problems, or this person's saying I've got some problems here, or I've got, this person starts to say, hey, you've got this underlying sadness, depression, you're going to have to deal with this. So this person goes, okay, well, they love their wife and they respect what they see, and they say, okay, I'll go and talk about it. So they go start talking about it and reveal all of this. And part of what we need to do essentially is reallocate responsibility. Now, it's not responsibility to affect today, like affect now, but it's kind of like we can grow up from this sort of situation, no matter who we were down here, carrying an unconscious sense of responsibility for something that we aren't responsible for or weren't responsible for, i.e., he wasn't responsible for his mother's depression. None of these children here were responsible for this here. And so part of it is sort of developing an awareness of the system that we grew up in and recognizing, hang on, I wasn't responsible for that. I wasn't responsible for this. Hang on, my parents are actually responsible for certain things that they, for whatever reason, weren't able to do. How has that affected me? And so there comes like a internal allocation of responsibility to help bring clarity to what we grew up in, so that we can understand now what's going on for us to resolve it and move forward. So Kate says there's some good questions here. Is it Maley? If I'm saying your name correctly, you're saying, could you say something about MBTI typing and children, how it might be helpful for parents and how it might cause problems? Okay, so typing children can be a bit of a hit and miss, I think. The child's brain is developing up until about the age of 25. And well, there's a lot of thoughts here. Let me try and go into each one. So, a child is still trying to figure themselves out and develop themselves. And so it can be just difficult to type children because, in a sense, like they might be more sociable as a child as they will be as an adult, but it's just part of their development as a child is to socialize and they might find themselves going to the parties, going to events, being in part of sport and all of that. And one could say, oh, they seem extroverted, in a sense, but it could just be part of their development. Early development, and as they sort of get older and sort of round out who they are, they might realize actually they're introverted and move in that direction, but it was kind of masked by the amount of activity that they were engaged in as a child. It can be helpful though to at least have one eye on it, I think, as parents grow, as the child grows up, just recognizing their potential preferences and responding to that. And it causes us to be able to speak in a certain way. So let's say we're a feeler and we kind of get the sense that our child's a thinker. That will lead us to communicate in a certain way. We might need to sort of put aside sort of our feeling approach to communication, adopting more of a logical approach for the child to resonate with it and respond to it. But then at the same time, let's say a parent recognizes that a child is introverted and starts responding in ways that promote or at least honor that introversion, could potentially go too far and move them away from a certain level of socialization that might actually sort of also be healthy for them. And so we could maybe go too far in promoting a preference or supporting a preference in them, and not at least honoring some of the other side, some of the out of preference parts of themselves. So on one hand, I think it's good to certainly be aware and observe and notice. I think it also comes down to the level of a parent's self-awareness too, in the sense of the why of why they're typing. Or let me just say it this way: there could be let's say there could be some unresolvedness in a parent that they're not aware of that could influence the way that they're typing the child or engaging with the child, that could be coming more out of their shadow than out of clarity. So it's just all these things just to keep in mind as parents building into the child. So I hope that kind of goes into that enough for you. Daffod, is that how you say it? Could it be the opposite as well, where the children are emotionally pushed away, where the physical needs are met but emotionally neglected? Absolutely. Definitely. So as part of this system, so let's look at this differently. Let's say that the parents have a certain amount of unresolved their certain amount of unresolved emotional need. So let's say it's happening for both. It could happen a couple of ways. On one level, these two could be fighting one another for attention. Like this person over here is wanting attention to meet some of their unresolved emotional needs from their childhood, but obviously don't know it, and tries to get it from this person. Now that could be part. That could be part of the dynamic in this scenario we've been talking about, where when he's withdrawing because he doesn't want conflict, that could be triggering her need for attention and affection and affirmation. Some of it healthy and normal, some of it might be a deficit from childhood, and so it could cause her to come after him in such a way that it's more about her unresolved issue than just his neglect in the relationship, which will have a reverse effect. He'll end up wanting to withdraw further because he's feeling like she's trying to pull something out of him that maybe he just doesn't even have to give either. So, but speaking more to the question is, there could be so much going on up here that the children essentially become invisible, or one of the children becomes invisible, where for whatever reason, and it can happen this way, that like a couple of the children could be really prized and engaged with, and one child just gets ignored, just can't get a foot in the door, just like the lost child. Like this person over here could just, let me draw. It's like they're not a part of the system. It's like they're kind of on the outside. Often it's the middle child that becomes the lost child, but I think that's a bit of a cliche. It could, any child could become a lost child. And that goes into actually an area I wanted to go into and just haven't yet. That some of the other roles that can take place here. Let's say the system is all about looking great to the outside world. We are the prize-winning family of this community, and that's what we project out into the world. And yet there's a lot of issues going on behind closed doors that no one's aware of. One of the children can become there's a particular, like the problem child, and they go out and they cause, they go out and cause a scene in the community in some way and become like the bad child, like what we'd call in counseling sometimes the identified patient. This one's the one with all the problems, or let me say this one's the one with all the problems. So this one goes out to be the problem child, whereas this one is the lost child. So his role becomes just like no identity, a lack of value, just gets missed all the time. His voice doesn't get heard. Often, or part of it could be because a lot of the attention of the parents is going towards this child that is causing a lot of problems out in the community, bringing a bad name to the perfect family. And you kind of have this dynamic going on. I've already mentioned the extension of dad. One could be, this one here could become like the perfect one. Often for a child, they see the amount of instability that's going on around them, that they don't want to add to it. And so they're like, okay, well, I'm just not going to create any ripples at all. And so they could become very performance orientated as well, like, get the good grades, like just never a problem at all. And but in a sense, it's a role, it's a way of trying to bring balance to the system, but it's also be creating a performance mindset for this person to get attention. And that will they'll then take that out into their adult life. In a sense, they were like the perfect child, but they don't know who they are, because they've been too busy trying to not bring any more problems to the system that they haven't been able to develop. They essentially like they haven't been able to make mistakes and things like that because they're too busy trying not to cause any problems, and so that will create problems for themselves growing up. Now, I think it's important to recognize quickly that, in a sense, as children, to a large extent, they're not responsible for the way that they get co-opted into this whole structure. for a lot of the whole system, it's often happening in an unconscious way. But we like to think that, at least from parent-child, that the parents are responsible. The children aren't. For a lot of this stuff, they're just trying to help the system to survive. But then, as we grow up, as we become adults down here, then we are responsible for how this has ended up impacting us. We can't go back to childhood to figure it out. Sorry, you can't go back in time to change it. We just have to be responsible as adults. That this is, this person has to now be responsible for their depression, and they need to help heal the lost child within themselves. This person needs to recognize that their performance and being perfect is not their identity. It's become a protector. It's become a defense mechanism, and that there's more to them. There's probably exiles in them that need to be resolved and gotten in touch with to heal. For this person here, they could go off and get into all sorts of problems, consequences for their acting out the family, the dysfunction within the family system. And it could be through getting into trouble and all of those consequences that could lead them to saying, well, hang on, why am I even doing this in the first place? And might be that they've got a lot of unresolved anger towards their family or towards their father, for the way he conducted himself in the family of origin. So he has to deal with his anger. And there's a whole range of other roles that I'll just read through them, but won't go into them all. So another one can be mum's scapegoat or dad's scapegoat. Or one of the children could become a scapegoat. So whenever there's awkwardness or uncomfortableness in the family, it's like a shame-based family or whatever. The family can take it out on one of the children, tease them, make them cry, make fun of them in some way, that it diverts everybody's shame and everybody's uncomfortableness, and they direct it to one child and use them in that way to bring relief to the system, but it's awfully damaging for the one that's being shamed. Mentioned the lost child, the perfect one. One of the children could grow up to become a victim or a martyr or an enabler. The overachiever is potentially part of this person. And we talked about the surrogate spouse. So, he could become a surrogate spouse to the mother. She could become a surrogate spouse to the father. This person here is acting out in the community, whatever that could be becoming an addict of some kind. All of this system creates a lot of disturbance, and it kind of gets absorbed into a particular family member who doesn't know that it's even happening to them and has got a lot of distress. That distress needs medicating in some way, and it could form an addiction. I think there's some more questions. I'll just run through these and then I'll get on to the questions. Someone could become the confidant. I've sort of mentioned that. So, in these two cases, what can't be resolved between the couple but in the relationship gets talked about through a confidant in the family. And it could be just one. There could even be one. Could even be this one originally, where they they talk to the father and sort of understand and sympathize and counsel essentially, and then could go over here and do the same thing, and it could almost become a triangulation, like a go-between. Can be very damaging for somebody to do that. We talked about like the little parents, in a sense. All of these roles can act out as like parents to the system. So that, I think, covers a lot of them. Let me just read the questions. Did I answer your question? Could it be the opposite as well, where the children are emotionally pushed away? Yeah, I think I've answered that. G'day, Neil. Good to see you. Muhammad, how to deal with stonewalling in such a broken relationship? So, Muhammad, if you're watching this in real time, well, there's a lot of things here. Are you talking about a stonewalling from a parent or from a child? Stephanie, don't know if you mentioned this, but what about children who go into withdrawal or a victim mode rather than a rescuer mode? Yeah. So I've probably spoken to some extent on that, but there certainly could be a role where with one of the children they just withdraw from the whole thing. They just they're in their room a lot, or they're out a lot with friends and all of that. Just not being able to cope with being in the system, and so their way of coping with the system is to not be in it. Victim, that's a difficult one. Sort of, the child taking on a victim persona. I guess it could. I guess it could be a way, being a victim or acting like a victim could be a way of trying to get attention in the system. Could even create situations that cause them to be a victim for then in a way of getting attention. Okay, Coach just mentioned stonewalling from a parent. Okay. There's when I'm thinking about this one, it's what could I say about that? When a child is being stonewalled by a parent. Let me sit with that one. Hopefully I'll come back to it. I just want to sit with it a bit before answering that one. Okay. Daft, I hope I answered your question. Just let me know if I have or haven't, because I think I did kind of go into it from a lost child perspective. Still trying to perfect the art of being live and reading and answering questions on the fly. So what if it were from both angles, same child? I hope that makes sense. So I think what you mean, Amber, is where from both angles, if you're meaning from, like maybe this child here is being both a surrogate to both parents. Are you able to maybe just answer that, and I'll just keep going? The lost child, I think, tries to keep out of it and withdraws into books and plays by self. Call me David. Thank you. Absolutely, David, I agree with you. Okay, any more questions? In my family, the lost withdrawn one was nearly always the scapegoat. In my family, the lost withdrawn one was it? Yeah, I think basically any role could be a scapegoat role in a way. Like this child here that goes and acts out, they could become the scapegoat. This one over here, the lost child, could become a scapegoat as well. It's like a way of talking about it is like the identified patient. It's like we're all fine, but this child needs help. And it's like, well, actually, the system needs help most likely, and the child's acting something of the system out in some way. In my family, okay. So David, you're saying, yes, Scott, there is a lot of shame and one goes through life not knowing why or what it is. Absolutely. A sense of feeling unworthy in some way. Yeah, and I'd say that those sorts of parts are like the exiled parts. Shame is it's like a very toxic, entrenched part that can be created, especially if it's created from a very young age, like this, the scapegoating or the lost child starts very young, then it's almost feels like it's second nature, but not even knowing what it is. And that would be, the work of kind of finding out the ways that we would protect that shame. Finding out and understanding those protectors, and then going down into the exile, eventually finding out what's being protected. And this, because I like to look at it, those exiles, like I'm only acceptable when I'm perfect, and or I'm unworthy, or I'm not good enough. A lot of this tends down to I'm not good enough. It comes into rejection, it comes into all sorts of things. And but none of that is the true self. All of this is created in childhood. It's all an extension. It becomes an extension of the true self. And part of the growth is recognizing the protectors and the exiles and going, well, none of that is really who I really am. These are all being created parts to survive. And to the level that I'm able to understand or notice these parts of myself, the more I can be in true self and not act out of any of those things, but learn to recognize them and respond in a different way. So like for this person here, they might get some help and recognize that they've got a problem with anger, both as a protector and an exile. So it's like, okay, well, you've got some issues with anger. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from, identify it comes from his father and his reactions to his father's anger, and he has to deal with some of the physical abuse that occurred to him, that led to him needing to protect himself in that way, and becoming so in the context of the relationship, when he notices that there's a problem or there's a potential conflict, and he starts to feel that part that wants to withdraw or wants to hide. And now that he's empowered by self-awareness, he's like, hang on a second, let me look at what's really going on here. I notice a part that's anxious or that is afraid. It's afraid of conflict, but what's the likelihood really that this is going to be a conflict? And it can kind of sort of promote some of that rational brain side to look at it and go, it's probably unlikely. There's really nothing for me to avoid here, actually. That could be a response to something, and be able to engage in a conversation to resolve something, which actually the resolving of it avoids the conflict, whereas the avoidance of it promotes the conflict. And that just brings back to one of the other principles, which is to protectors ultimately bring on the very thing that they're avoiding. So this child here, whose protector is to be performance and be perfect, they're not going to get top marks all the time. They're going to get some criticism somewhere, like something's going to happen that's going to trigger the belief that actually they're not perfect, which would be an exile underneath the perfectionism. So it all comes down to sort of building in that self-awareness, noticing parts, reallocating responsibility. I wasn't responsible for my mother's depression. I wasn't responsible for this person here. I wasn't responsible for my parents' relationship. And so a lot of this work often happens in adulthood. It's wonderful when it happens, when like this context happens when the children are still children and the parents can figure some things out within themselves, which leads to a ripple effect back into the family system, where there can be healing that takes place. It'd be a very challenging journey in some respects, but a very rewarding one eventually. It's like reversing all of this, flipping, where this gets flipped upside down, so the children become the parents, is the parents waking up to that and going, actually, that's not what I want. And so they start switching it back around so that the parents are taking care of the children. And that can create some instability, because often sometimes children get used to their role. They get used to being like for this one, used to being mum's special one. You know, this child here being dad's special one. And when dad actually says no, you know, doesn't allow the child anymore, doesn't allow the child anymore to be that sort of surrogate parent or spouse, could get hurt. They could get hurt by that. They feel rejected by it. But what's really happening is they're actually putting in a nice healthy boundary to say, you don't need to take that role anymore. And that can be disorientating and challenging. But you know, over time, working through it, they can sort of reclaim reclaim themselves and who they really are. And as the title of the podcast talks about, you could say it reallocating the proper roles, the roles of parent versus the roles of children. So in a sense, roles are normal in the sense of parents, you know, these people, their role is to be a parent. But these children, their role, in a sense, is to be a child, but it's about them being children rather than being the role, like developing those roles of scapegoat, victim, the perfect one, and all of that is the problem. So it's about turning those roles into relationship. So this role of carrying the depression, this role of avoiding anger, you know, dealing with that so that they can actually stop playing that dynamic out with each other and build a deeper relationship with one another that would have a good positive flow and effect to the children, and so on. So let me just quickly read through the comments. Muhammad, from a parent. Okay, I will get into that one. One child is a caregiver and the other a protector. So you're answering my question, I think. So what if it were from both angles, same child, and you're saying as a caregiver and the protector? So I guess that is a good point, Amber, that we could have a number of different roles in one child. I'm wondering what you mean by protector, like the protector of the family system, perhaps. So caregiving could be a form of protecting, if I'm understanding what you're saying. So yeah, it all comes down to context. You answered me, Scott. Thank you. I should keep reading, shouldn't I, sometimes? To clarify, Scott, I meant stonewalling between the spouses. Sorry, this may be off topic. No, I think that's important, Muhammad. Yeah. So stonewalling between parents. So in a sense, the way we sort of look at that in here would be like that. So as a child, I mean, it's a difficult one. How do I deal with that as a child with two parents doing that? I guess on one level we can just look at what might be going on here. Stonewalling, I think, often occurs as a last resort. Whether they've tried everything under the sun to fix things and it hasn't worked, or just due to the system that they've created. It's a bit like when I was saying before, when there's unresolved needs in both parents and they're both trying to get something from the other, you know, you give me what I want and the other's saying, no, you give me what I want, and both are trying to protect themselves from being manipulated, you've got a stonewall. Noticing that, I would say noticing as a child, or maybe not even as a child, as an adult that's grown up with some of this going on, would simply be a case of how did that affect me? How did having parents stonewalling each other, maybe for considerable periods of time, what was that like for me? What did I feel? How did I respond to that? What did I do as a result of that stonewalling? What was my reaction to it? Because in a sense, the child can't do anything about the stonewalling, either as a child to a great extent, and also as an adult, because it's we're adults now. It's that time of life is over. Would simply be saying, how did it affect me? How did it? What beliefs maybe did I end up carrying about myself, about that experience? Well, how did it teach me about relationships? How might I be modeling that myself, either within myself, either the stonewalling parts of myself, or stonewalling in my own relationships, or have I had the opposite of stonewalling? Am I too open? Just lots of open, curious questions to basically ask the question: how did my parents' stonewalling affect me? In what ways did that happen? And getting some clarity around that. Okay. Hi, Scott. I just found out I was an INFJ recently, and I found your channel. I want to say thank you for helping me understand more of myself through your vids. You're very welcome. Thank you, CJ. That's great. I just wish you were around when I was younger. Life would have been easier. Yeah. I guess that's kind of why I made the channel. That hopefully, there'll be some people that find the channel and the content hopefully a lot earlier than maybe they would have without the channel, and are able to resolve things sooner in their lives rather than later. So Amber, well, sorry, protecting one parent and other kids from physical abuse. Yeah, okay. Thanks, Amber. I'm sorry to be difficult asking more clarifying questions. Protecting one parent and other kids from physical abuse. Protecting one parent and other. That's a huge situation there. What can a child do? It's in some respects, a child can be very resourceful in the way that they try to deal with what they see in the family, but they're going to come off probably second best in a lot of ways. I mean, as I don't know the circumstances of the question, but I'm just picturing a child stepping in between a parent and an abusive parent, and standing in between the parent and their siblings, basically trying to protect them from physical abuse. That's just really, I mean, it's sad. In a sense, I mean, it's coming out of love, trying to protect their loved ones, essentially from abuse, but in a sense they end up putting themselves in a position to be abused. But it's very understandable that a sibling could do that. So some children, there's just that thing in them that just sees the injustice and sees the damage, and steps in. And it seems like, let's look at maybe some different personality types that could do that. You could say on one level, like the empath, even the HSP is the one potentially doing that, because they see the effects and they see the damage that's being caused, and they almost feel like they can't but not step in to try to protect and take care of. But essentially, if they get on the receiving end of that abuse as a sensitive HSP empath, that's going to have a deep, deep impact on them. We would hope that it was effective, that it would be effective, that a parent would step back, would disengage through that act, but maybe not always the case. It could also be, on one level, that more sort of robust personality type of like that cleric sort of personality type A, whatever you want to call that grows up and steps in. Often you hear the 15, 16-year-old son who eventually steps in and says, you're not going to do that anymore, to an abusive parent, and it stops. Eventually, the child grows up to a point where they are physically stronger and they are able to step in and say enough's enough. Terribly sad situations, though, I have to say. Triangulation of children by a parent causes conflict and stonewalling between siblings. Very true. I think that's what I was trying to say here. It could either be conflict between the two, or, as you say, David, it could also lead to stonewalling between the two siblings. They're united with the mother, they're united with the father, and so that essentially they end up acting this out, and it's got nothing to do with them. It's got absolutely nothing to do with them. It's like they're playing a role. They're playing acting out a play, because it's really it's like they end up hating each other, but it's all because of what was going up on here. Without all of this, they might have been very close and best of friends. CZ, very dysfunctional family growing up. Both parents are now deceased. Is real healing still possible? I recognize on one level that I was not responsible, but the hurt is deep. Yeah. Well, CZ, I like to think that it is possible. I guess being a counselor, there's for me personally, there's that heart that it's always possible to heal. Everybody's different. What everyone's been through is different, and how it's affected them is different. And time can, they say time heals. Well, time can also embed stuff down deep as well. But I think it's about, let's say, layers of healing that we can go through stages of healing, and is there ultimate healing? Well, I like to think there is. Now, that might just come down to some spiritual beliefs on my part, being someone that believes in the who Christ was, and the Holy Spirit and its ability to work in people's lives. I believe that it is possible. That's just my own personal stuff, though, personal beliefs. I've found that, yes, let's say God can do things to people that remove deep layers of hurt. I've found, though, that I've experienced both of those. I've experienced both this sort of, it's gone now, it's just not there anymore, but most of it has been through trudging the road, dealing with life, dealing with what happens, noticing what's going on internally, working with people, all of that sort of thing, that slow kind of lifelong journey of healing. And as we go along, we can go through stages. And it seems interesting that on some levels, why couldn't this have happened 20 years ago, 30 years ago? And I think that they're really legitimate questions and frustrations. I could say that for myself in certain ways. Why did it take this amount of time for me to figure this one out when I felt like I was open about it 20 years ago, or 5 years ago, or whatever? I think it's just a mystery. But I kind of like to think that timing of things isn't an accident as well, that sometimes we're just not ready until we're ready, and sometimes that takes longer than we would even like. But we're complex people. But I guess to answer the question, Susie, I think it is possible to heal, but I think it's often a gradual thing. It's like a life's journey. When it's the right time for things to come up, they come up for us, and we start to look at it. Good, Mohammed. I'm glad that makes sense. Well, I think that's about everything. Let me just check my notes. One thing we didn't talk about today is when there's been divorces and step siblings in the mix. So this could be a second marriage for both of them, and one or both could have parents from, sorry, children from other marriages, um, and some of them could be living with this family, and so that just adds a whole new layer of potential complexities and challenges. But yeah, just to add that this is like a nuclear family model, but a lot of people don't have, grow up in nuclear family models these days. They're often a mix, a mix of things. But just wanted to keep it simple today, looking at it from this perspective. Well, I think that pretty much covers it. I'm not quite sure what the next topic for next time will be. I just want to sort of sit with it and just see what the next logical thing will be, and like to keep it kind of a logical flow of themes that kind of one follows on to the next, to the next, to the next. So, but I'm just not quite sure what the next one will be, but will happen next time. So the next date is Thursday, the 28th of June for everyone in the US. Same time basically as today, on the 28th of June, and for people in Australia and New Zealand, it's the 29th, Friday the 29th of June. There are more things here. CZ, I use my life to serve Christ, and that helps. It's more that I just lock the hurt away. Is that healthy? CZ, I think sometimes it is healthy. I think sometimes, depending on a whole lot of things, sometimes things are just so difficult that I'm going to be, I guess, careful or sensitive the way I say this, but some people just say, I just can't go there. I just don't want to open that up. And that has to be absolutely respected. And until maybe there's an opportunity to heal it, and sometimes life presents those moments, it's best left alone if it's, if a person either can't access it or just not feeling safe yet to, or it's not the right time to. It's almost like if we're consciously locking it away, it's probably less unhealthy than the unconscious locking away. So the fact that you're saying that you know what it is that you're locked away, I think you're in a better place, I think, than the person that has locked stuff away and has no idea that they have. But I guess the more healthier potentially of the three is the ability and the opportunity to go there and resolve it, process it in whatever way, shape, or form that needs to take. And sometimes we just can't do that on our own. Everyone's different, timing's different. Things just happen in certain ways sometimes. So let me just keep reading. I think this is the beginning of healing, seeking for answers and working through the hurts. Absolutely, David. Totally. Mohammed, off topic. As an INFJ, I tend to trust my intuition and deep thinking too much, and that can lead me to either miss the big picture or impose my ideas on others, and I often fall into conflict and hurt myself and the other person, even though my intentions were honestly good. Yeah, well, that's good insight, Mohammed. To see that is really powerful, I think. I think it's good to trust intuition and deep thinking. The too much might be more about what you end up doing with your intuition and your thinking. So yeah, it can lead to either missing the big picture and impose my ideas and thoughts on others. Yeah, so it could be like just the level of awareness that you're describing now, to me, would just make sense then to lead that towards being conscious of the big picture and conscious of how you communicate your intuition onto others. I made a video called NI as a defense mechanism, and might speak to some of that to some extent. You're welcome, Amber. I hoped it was helpful. Absolutely, Balladry, I think that's right. I think healing won't begin until one is in a safe place. Absolutely, absolutely. Safety is paramount for healing. Without it, it's not. It's either not possible or it's highly undermined by the fact that there's not safety. To the level that we are safe, I think is to the level that we can heal and work through things. Stephanie, thank you. Lots of thinking about, and I'll probably go back and watch this again. Yeah. Meta MBTI. A wise man once told me, keep your heart and your mind moving like an engine, back and forth. FETI, FETI, FETI. Keep your INFJ insides running. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. I think it sort of talks about that NITI loop. Is that FE is really important to the NITI loop can be both highly productive and empowering and destructive depending on what it is that it's processing, or like the NITI just going away and thinking about things and processing the whole thing through the intuition, through the TI, can lead to some really interesting and empowering insights and things like that. But I think when it comes down to those protectors and exiles, if essentially we've got some defense mechanism that's playing itself out through our NI and our TI, then it can lead to a stuckness, as you say, like the engine can cease to run smoothly, and it needs some of that FE engagement with the outer world to bring. It's like FE, you could almost say, is like oil. It's like oils the internal mechanisms of the INFJ, keeping it all running smoothly. Okay. All right. Well, unless there's just other comments or questions, I might leave it there for today. Thanks everybody for turning up, and I just appreciate it if you haven't already, just give the video a thumbs up, just to promote it a little bit, get it out there if you found it helpful. And it's just really been really good today to get a lot more interaction on the topic, and maybe if you've got some ideas, I mean, I will bring a topic to the next session for sure. But if you want to contribute to what that could look like, feel free to send me an email. Just to plug the counseling again for those that might be watching it after it's gone live. That I'm a counselor, an MBTI practitioner, and been doing it for 10 years now. And if what I'm talking about resonates, you want to see what my services are about, just check out my website at scottericmorgan.com. I'll leave a link in the description. Thanks everybody for coming today. It's been really good just bouncing this all around. It's interesting where it ends up when there's a lot of interaction and so on. And yeah, look forward to catching up again next month, where we'll delve into another topic. And yeah, hope all is well for everybody, and I'll see you in another video.